The American Civil War was one of the most significant events in American history. It was also one of the deadliest wars in world history, and it all started because of this guy. Okay, so before we get into the video, let us take a look at some of the reasons why the Civil War is such an important topic. First off, the Civil War was the deadliest conflict in U.S. history with more than 620,000 soldiers dying. To put that into perspective, the Vietnam War, which lasted for 20 years, only resulted in around 58,000 deaths. The Civil War also led to the end of slavery in the United States. And lastly, the war set the United States on its path to becoming a global superpower. Alright, now let's go ahead and get started. So the Civil War was fought between two opposing sides, the Union and the Confederacy. The Union, also known as the North, consisted of the original 20 states, as well as those admitted to the Union between 1845 and 1861. On the other hand, the Confederacy, also known as the South, included the 11 states that seceded from the Union between 1860 and 1861. Now there were many reasons for the start of the Civil War, but the main cause was the institution of slavery in the southern states. Slavery had been a part of the Southern economy since the colonial period, and the Southern states were deeply invested in maintaining it. As the country began to industrialize and move toward a free labor system, the Northern states began to see slavery as morally reprehensible and economically inefficient. In contrast, the Southern states argued that slavery was necessary for their way of life, and that they had the right to own slaves. Another reason for the war was the issue of states' rights. The Southern states believed that they had the right to secede from the Union if they felt that the federal government was infringing on their rights. This belief was based on the concept of popular sovereignty, which held that the power to govern was ultimately in the hands of the people. The Southern states also argued that the federal government had no right to interfere in the institution of slavery. This was known as the doctrine of nullification, which held that states could nullify or ignore federal laws that they deemed unconstitutional. Lastly, the issue of westward expansion also played a role in the start of the war. As the United States expanded westward, the question of whether or not slavery would be allowed in new territories became a point of contention between the North and the South. The Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 were attempts to resolve this issue, but they only provided temporary solutions. Ultimately, the dispute over slavery in the territories contributed to the growing divide between the North and the South and helped to set the stage for the Civil War. Now that we know what led up to the war, let's talk about the major players. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States, and he served during the Civil War. He was known for his leadership during the war and his commitment to preserving the Union. Next, we have Jefferson Davis. He was the first and only president of the Confederate States of America, and he led the Confederacy during the Civil War. Then we have Robert E. Lee. He was a general in the Confederate Army and is considered to be one of the most skilled military commanders in American history. Lastly, we have Ulysses S. Grant, who was a general in the Union Army, and he led the Union to victory in the Civil War. One of the first major battles of the Civil War was the Battle of Fort Sumter. It took place in April of 1861 in Charleston, South Carolina. And it was the first battle between the Union and the Confederacy. Okay, so here's how it went down. A group of Confederate soldiers attacked Fort Sumter, which was being occupied by Union troops. After a 34-hour bombardment, the Union surrendered the fort, and no casualties were suffered by the Confederates. However, Union soldiers lost their lives during the battle. The battle was a symbolic start to the Civil War, and it led to the secession of 4 more slave states. Another major battle of the Civil War was the Battle of Antietam, also known as the Battle of Sharpsburg. It took place on September 17, 1862 near Sharpsburg, Maryland. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War with over 20,000 casualties, so here's how it went down. The battle was fought over control of a small town called Sharpsburg, and it was a tactical draw. However, the Union was able to hold its ground, which was a strategic victory for them. The battle is significant because it was the single bloodiest day in American history. It also led to the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation. Moving on to the next battle, the Battle of Gettysburg. It took place from July to July 1863 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It is considered to be the turning point of the Civil War. Okay, so here's how it went down. The battle began with the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia invading northern Pennsylvania. They were met by the Union Army of the Potomac, and the two armies clashed at Gettysburg. The battle was a tactical victory for the Confederacy, but it was a strategic victory for the Union. The battle resulted in a total of around 51,000 casualties. Following the battle, the Confederacy never invaded the North again. Also, President Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg. In December of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that all slaves in the Confederate States were to be freed. The Emancipation Proclamation was a major turning point in the Civil War. It transformed the war into a crusade for human rights, and it also allowed African Americans to serve in the Union Army. As the Civil War raged on, the Union and the Confederacy suffered devastating losses. The Battle of Vicksburg was a major turning point in the war. It took place from May to July 1863 in Vicksburg, Mississippi. It resulted in the surrender of the Confederate forces, and the Union gained control of the Mississippi River. The Siege of Petersburg was a long and brutal siege that lasted from June 1864 to April 1865. It resulted in the capture of Petersburg and the surrender of the Confederate Army. The Civil War finally came to an end on April 9, 1865, when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The terms of the surrender were generous, and they included the release of Confederate prisoners and the confiscation of Confederate weapons. In the aftermath of the Civil War, the United States entered into a period of rebuilding known as the Reconstruction era. During this time, the country worked to repair the damage caused by the war and to integrate former slaves into society. However, the Reconstruction era was marked by violence and discrimination against African Americans, and it wasn't until the mid-20th century that the goals of racial equality and political and economic justice were fully realized. So now let's do a quick review. We covered a lot of information in this video, but it is important to understand the causes of the Civil War and its impact on American history. The main causes of the Civil War were slavery, states' rights, and westward expansion. The war resulted in the emancipation of slaves and the preservation of the Union. The Civil War also had a devastating impact on the country, and it led to the Reconstruction era. If you want to learn more about the Civil War, I recommend checking out some additional resources. You can also comment below with any questions you might have, and I will try my best to answer them. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. Thank you for watching.